So today my guest is Ryan Hoover. Ryan is the founder of Product Hunt, producthunt.co, which is a site for discovering new products like mobile apps, websites, hardware projects, and tech creations updated daily and curated by the Product Hunt members. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, how's it going, Felix?
Good. So you obviously have a ton of success right now with the recent round that you raised, and just over the past year, I've heard so much about Product Hunt and the things that you're doing. But I kind of want to wind the clock back a little bit to the very beginning, where you first kind of started your startup life as a product manager, where you were director of product at PlayHaven. So what was PlayHaven, and what were you guys doing over there?
Yeah. Well, actually, if you go back a little bit further, I was my first role in product manager was at a previous company right before that. It was called InstantAction, and it was in the PC gaming space. I actually kind of fell into the role. I was doing marketing straight out of college, and then my boss was a VP of product. And so, long story short, I ended up, moving into product management, learning on the job. I had no idea what I was doing. It's kind of embarrassing if I look back on what I was actually doing, and learned along the way. So from there, I joined PlayHaven. I was the first PM there for maybe a year and a half. I was the only PM, I want to say. And then same thing, just kind of learn on the job. So, college doesn't, my college and most really don't provide direct kind of education or guidance on product management because it's somewhat of a vague role and it varies by company. So, that's how I learned is just, getting an opportunity, fortunately, in the actual role itself.
Yeah, that seems to happen a lot where people kind of just fall into this role because, like you're saying, there's really no track to get to a product management job using the kind of traditional way of going to school for a particular, concentration or major and then coming out and getting a product management job. It's not that straightforward. So once you first got that transition to product management, how did you get the second job at PlayHaven? What were you doing kind of to market yourself and get a position as a product manager at a different company?
Yeah, so I was fortunate in that I transitioned from InstantAction to PlayHaven, and the COO actually, Andy Yang, he joined PlayHaven. So I worked with him at the previous company, and that's how we got connected. And he knew that I had this interest in this talent in the product management space, so he gave me a shot. I was still pretty green. I think I was only a PM for about a year before I moved to PlayHaven, and he took a chance on me, and super fortunate for that. So really, it's just like most businesses. There's also an element of connections and relationships that you build. And it's really a testament to how important it is to treat people fairly and good and build relationships in a network. And that's how I got my role at PlayHaven, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you first got the role at PlayHaven, what were some skills that you think that is very important for a product manager to have that you had to kind of develop on the job?
I think there's a number of them. I think part of it is empathy. Is a recurring theme that probably every single PM would say at some point, is just understanding how do you understand what people want and how they feel and how they react to things, and having some empathy for other people. It's really important, especially if you're building a product for someone else. So at PlayHaven, it was in the mobile gaming space, and we were building tools for mobile game developers. And I was not a mobile game developer. I'm not today. And so for me, I had to really understand, okay, what is their day-to-day like? What challenges they have? How are they being measured? And you really find that stuff out by observing behavior and talking to mobile game developers. And so empathy is kind of a recurring theme and something that you just need to understand and have an appreciation for. And to go along with that, you kind of have to be humble in a way, too. You have to also realize that your assumption is probably not correct, as confident as you are. So it's good to have confidence, but also to verify those assumptions and talk to customers and look at data to understand that, are you actually building something that people want?
Yeah, that makes sense. What was your day-to-day like? I know you're saying that you spent a lot of time actually talking and observing the customers. Does that mean that you are going to their offices every day, or what does your day-to-day consist of?
Yeah, at PlayHaven it was a combination of many different things. Part of it, frankly, is intuition. So it's actually not talking to customers because you can't talk to them about every single thing. So you have to have some intuition on how this interface should look and how it should work. So there's that piece. But then in terms of getting actual quantifiable data, there's looking at the metrics. What pieces of the product are people using is one piece of it. So over time in our product, we had this dashboard with many different features. And something that we did do at one point is we just looked at, okay, what are people actually using? Which tools are they using out of these 10 that we created? And that gives you an understanding of, okay, why are they not using these other 2 tools? Is it because they have no use for it? Is it because it's too confusing? Is it because they can't measure the output and therefore they won't use it? So you start building these hypotheses around why they're using some things and why they're not using others. And you can take that information with you when you go talk to customers. So I would go to like big companies and small companies, like Glue Mobile, for example. We would go to their office and talk with some of their VPs and some of their producers directly about PlayHaven and also about, their own personal goals and what they're trying to achieve. I would also talk on the phone with some indie game developers, some guys that are like literally a guy in the garage building a game. So you kind of get a variety of opinions and perspectives. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of, just data and qualitative feedback that you get.
I see what you're saying. So you first do the research, do the data, in your office, and then go out and talk to the customers to help kind of validate those assumptions that you came up with based on the data, and also just kind of give you context when you're having the conversation, so that you're not unaware of how they use it, but which you can easily get by looking at the data. So what other tools do you use for you to do your job as a product manager?
Let me think here. So we had an internal tool that we used for looking at data and doing some data analysis that we used at PlayHaven. And then we used some project management tools. At one point we were using Pivotal, and then we grew to a pretty large-sized team, so we moved to Jira. So we use kind of the standard tools in that sense. I haven't found any particular eclectic tools that other people don't use that have been super valuable. I mean, we use Gmail, we use Google Docs, we use pen and paper. Mm-hmm. Pen and paper whiteboards are oftentimes the best thing for collaboration and that kind of thing. So nothing too surprising, honestly. If you find if you know of any cool product management tools, let me know, because I haven't found anything that's been demonstrably impactful in making my job easier.
Yeah, it seems like there are some kind of new tools that are coming out there that are almost like specialized for the entire product management job. I'm not sure how well they're playing out yet, but it does seem like there's some interest in the space of making the job for a product manager easier. Were you using any tools for like wireframing or any apps for that?
Yeah, I personally like OmniGraffle, and I know it's not the most popular tool, but I've just become really familiar with it, and I know the shortcuts, and I have stencils, and for me, I can wireframe things pretty quickly in OmniGraffle. Other people use Balsamic, some go straight into Sketch, and others. So I use that. I also will force myself to avoid any digital tools like that for wireframing, though, and I go straight to Whiteboard or Post-it notes, and for that, it makes it easier to sketch out ideas faster, and since it's so constrained, and since you can't change or edit your pen, it forces you to be very succinct and quick in sketching out your ideas. One mistake I've made is I will use something like OmniGraffle, and I will, for whatever reason, start being pixel perfect in my wireframes. And for some things, when it's early on, it's just a waste of time. Right. But I'm such a perfectionist that I will just spend this extra time, aligning things correctly when really it's not important.
Yeah, sometimes tools can definitely consume your time when it's not really moving the needle. So like you're saying before, there is a lot of collaboration when it comes to things like working as a product manager, and then also while you're doing things like wireframing, you need designers or other folks in the room. What was the team like that you're working with, and what kind of roles did they have, and how did you work with them?
So this is actually something that people need to be aware of that maybe aren't in a product management role, or maybe not in startups, is that first off, product management role varies by company, but it also varies by team size. When I joined PlayHaven, we were around 10 people or so, and it was just me and a bunch of engineers for the most part. We didn't have a designer. We actually had a visual designer at one point, but it was me doing the wireframes and UX and everything, along with the general product management role. And then we grew to 100 people, and we started building out multiple product management teams. We had a UX designer, a visual designer, and that certainly changed the way that we worked, because now we had more resources to build out more fully fledged features, and do more research. Whereas before it was just me making some quick wireframes, engineers building it, and there's pros and cons to both approaches. The pro is that you can move relatively fast with few resources, few people, but you may not be coming out with the best product because you have someone like myself doing, all of the work when it comes to UX when, a professional that does this full-time for a living could probably come out with something better. So it really varies in that you kind of have to adapt to those different roles. Like when you're in the beginning and you're just building wireframes as the PM and you're working with a small team, it's pretty loose and there's relatively usually very little process, and that's a good thing. But then when you're bigger, you need more process, and you have to plan ahead more. You have to communicate with a lot more people. Like communication is probably the most important skill set for a product manager. Being able to talk with a lot of people, and that gets back to empathy. Being able to empathize with an engineer and with a designer is really important to building a good team, but also making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I was going to jump to that next. When you're kind of a smaller team, the communication issues that you might have aren't really enlarged. They're not that serious, I guess, because the team is so small that you guys can hear each other's conversations. But once it grows to 100 people or more, those communication kind of issues that you might not have worked out earlier then really start to show themselves. Would you have if you could give a tip or number one tip that you have for working with, like, let's say, developers or engineers, what would it be?
I would say, number one tip, I would say, I guess, err on too much communication rather than under-communicating. Mm-hmm. You don't want to, so the one thing that people that are not familiar with product management, or maybe not familiar with engineering, that they make this mistake. They go up to an engineer and they say, hey, can you build this thing? Can you add this thing? Like this happened. I mean, they don't have this empathy or this understanding that they have a lot of other things going on. When you talk to an engineer, a lot of times they're headed in a different place, and you immediately break this spider web of code that's in your head when you interrupt them. And then you can also really frustrate people when you're like, okay, here's this new thing, can you build it? And you don't think ahead. So as a team gets bigger, you want to kind of have some level of communication and a process for that, and understanding that, it might seem easy, and it might be easy, but don't just throw things on engineers. Like, you got to give them some warning to an extent if you can. Same thing for designers, but I feel like it's even more prevalent with engineers, the way that they operate and the way that they typically like to work.
Right, that makes sense. And what about when you go talk to clients? Like, what are some kind of tips or things that you keep in mind when you go and talk to them? Do you like do things like conduct customer interviews, or do you do like testing or anything with your customers when you go meet them in person?
It varies. It depends on what we're focusing on. Sometimes we're exploring new product ideas, new feature ideas, and we start with not, here's this cool idea, aren't you going to love it? That's a bad way of trying to understand what they actually need. But we do start exploring questions around that space. An example could be, we have a prompt idea that will increase engagement. And so we might start asking questions about that, like, how do you measure engagement? Or how are users currently engaging with your product? And start pulling out some themes. Then maybe towards the end of that conversation, you start talking more specifically about, okay, here's this thing I have, this idea we have, this feature. Maybe we'll show them wireframes. Maybe we'll show them a prototype. Maybe we'll have them just play with it, and we'll sit back and watch and see what they do. So it kind of varies. Usability tests are really helpful at some point. You don't want to introduce them too early in a conversation like that. But when you get to that stage, having them just use a product and having them struggle with it, because that's inevitably going to happen, most likely. And it's super painful, but you'll learn a lot when you see them playing with your actual prototype or your product.
Yeah, and then once the product is built, do you have any kind of recommendations or any rules of thumb or any strategies for making sure that a new product release is launched successfully?
So that can fit within the role of a product manager. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes it's kind of the role of a product marketing manager, or just a marketing team in general. It's such a contextual question. It really depends on what you're building. Are you building a new feature for an existing audience, or are you building a brand new product? And so the approach would be completely different. I think, so yeah, it's kind of hard to answer that without having a certain frame or context. If it's, let's say, an existing feature, then a feature to an existing audience, like let's say at PlayHaven when we release a new tool, then for us it's communicating, okay, here's what this tool is, here's what it does, here's why it's important, and why and communicating along with, what their goals are, why it will help them do better in their job. That's communicated through email, it's communicated through the actual product itself, on the dashboard, let's say. It's also communicated throughout the company, because at PlayHaven we had a team of account managers and salespeople too. So it's important for them to understand this is what it does, here's how you communicate externally, and they can then do the sales and education of new features.
That makes sense. So, when you were a director there, I'm sure you've came across a lot of product manager applicants and folks that wanted to get into the role. When you're interviewing someone for a product manager job, what are some things that you've seen applicants come through with that kind of blew you away and made you think this is the perfect person to join our team?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I guess it's kind of hard for any role. We're hiring also at Product Hunt right now, and the best candidates are people I've already worked with and that I know are good. Otherwise, it's through referrals oftentimes. So at PlayHaven rather, that was similar. A lot of the hires that we got were through referrals or people that had worked with them before. And actually, a lot of the people from InstantAction, the previous company I was with, joined PlayHaven early on. So I think maybe we might have recruited 8 or 10 people from InstantAction at one point. When I do see someone that I don't know or doesn't have a referral necessarily, I typically look at what have they actually done, and I will also stalk them online. I'll look on Twitter, what are they talking about on Twitter, if they're on there, do they have a blog, what are they writing about? I've written about this before, but blogging is one of many different ways to brand yourself, but also communicate your ideas. And since a product manager doesn't necessarily do design, they don't do code, they don't have like a GitHub profile you can point to, blog is a really good way to communicate how you think about things, how you think about products.
Yeah, but what are some other ways
that's the thing I look at.
Sorry, what are some other ways they can do that? Because I know you did write a short blog post called Anyone Can Ship, and it's about creating side projects and how you don't need to be a technical or a designer or a coder to create a side project. What are some things, other things that an aspiring product manager can do outside of work with a side project to look attractive to a hiring company?
Yeah, I encourage people to do side products, and you can do many different things, of course. It could be an email newsletter. That's how Product Hunt actually started. It could be meetups. You could organize meetups in your city around startups or maybe some other category of interest. It could be a podcast. There's many different ways of effectively trying to create value in some way. Or it could be the product itself. Maybe you have this cool product idea and you just want to try it out. And that's actually a good way of getting into product management. If you have no opportunity to get a role in as a PM, which is really hard to do if you don't have experience, one way is just to build some sort of project on the side. And what you're doing by that is demonstrating your product sense, your ability to execute. And, there's no reason that you shouldn't start something like that. You don't necessarily need to code to do that. Figure out how do you build something simply, and how do you start measuring and getting some feedback on whether people care about this thing. And oftentimes it doesn't require code in the beginning.
Right, that makes sense. And I've seen some people go to lengths of taking their idea that they have and just hiring freelancers to build it for them, because I think that kind of shows your ability to manage resources. Because it's your own money, your own time that you have to put into it, and if you show that you can deliver something that has a value and that you're able to manage that entire process, manage another developer or maybe a couple of developers, and manage like the resource, I think it speaks a lot of volumes about the kind of performance that you can have on the job. So I've seen some cool stuff like that happen too. And you also actually wrote another blog post that I liked that was, I think was right after you made the jump outside of PlayHaven, and you were questioning whether you should learn how to code, because it seems like such a big, kind of movement right now. And you kind of settled on the idea that you shouldn't, because there's the opportunity cost that affects you, because you could be spending your time doing something more valuable, that more impactful for your life. But in general, the question I have is like, do you need to be technical, or how technical do you need to be a product manager?
Yeah. It's kind of like, unfortunately, a lot of my answers is it depends. Some roles as a PM, you need to be an engineer to be able to communicate what you're building, and that's just a requirement. Others, you need to be more maybe design-centric. You may not have to be technical at all, but you need to be very conscientious of like UX and how people think. So it heavily varies, honestly. It depends on kind of what type of company you want to join.
Yeah, so one last question I think that is kind of in minds of a lot of aspiring product managers when they look out in their career like 5 years down the line is, now that you've kind of found and recently raised a Series A investment round of Product Hunt and things are going really well for you at your new startup, do you find that you rely on your product management skills that you picked up on at PlayHaven in previous roles a lot, and which skills specifically?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to articulate the exact skills sometimes. I think part of it is over time you start learning how to speak with designers and developers. You start working with more of them. Some people just operate differently, so it gets back to human empathy and having an understanding of how people work. So there's kind of the people soft skills that you learn. There's the hard skills in terms of like how do you look at data and what should you measure. I wish I had a better way of articulating like the 5 skills or something that you should have as a product manager. But it's just a lot of learning on the job. It's a lot of being creative, but also curious too. Like Product Hunt was not the first experiment I did. I've done many different experiments and learned along the way doing those, whether I know it or not. So I think it's sort of having the right frame of mind and being open to experimentation and curiosity. And continually doing that over time, that you'll learn things without realizing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you're saying, experimentation and just kind of having the frame of mind to just take action and try things out and see where they go. I think that's an important way to A, get a job as a product manager, and B, to be successful in product management. Or when you decide to move on from there and start your own company, it's definitely a mindset that is, I think, important to have. Thanks so much for your time, Ryan. I think that you provide a lot of great information and actionable tips for anybody that's either just starting out in their product management career or beginning the process. So you have a blog, ryanhoover.me. Is there any other ways that folks can kind of reach out to you or follow your story?
Yeah. Hit me up on R Hoover, and I am all the time. So if you follow me, you'll probably see me multiple times per day.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.